The balcony across the courtyard. Silence has a shape. In our building, it looked like two shadows on a balcony across the courtyard, moving as if they were alone in the world. One of the shadows was my wife. The other held a cigarette and wore a hoodie that used to be mine. Maybe it still was. Some thefts happen in daylight with the door unlocked. I only noticed because our daughter, Mia, burst into the room with a drawing and said, "Mommy and Uncle Nikita on the balcony." We don't have an Uncle Nikita. Our ring of buildings faces inward, a circle of windows that stare at each other all day. You get to know the habits, the woman who waters plants at 6, the kid who juggles a soccer ball after dinner, the man on the 5th floor who takes calls packing in a square. You never expect the show to be about you. I went to the window and found my wife laughing with a stranger's shoulder. Her body language was a language I couldn't translate anymore. That night in bed, I asked who Nikita was. She said he was a friend of my cousin. I texted my cousin. He said he didn't know any Nikita besides a photographer who shot weddings and sometimes lived in our building when he wasn't in Bali. My wife said that must be the one. The way her eyes slid past me made the air feel greasy. The next evening I took the dog out and stayed longer than our dog deserved. Across the courtyard they were there again, the choreography of almost touching. He smoked. She made small circles on the railing with her finger, and I counted the circles until I had something like a prayer. When she came home, the smell on her was the balcony. Not quite smoke, not quite night, the scent of staying out of a conversation and still hearing every word. "Are we okay?" I asked. It was a soft question from a hard place. She said work was heavy, she needed air, and the balcony was therapeutic. I didn't ask what kind of pain was being treated or who was prescribing. I nodded like men nod when they don't know if they're agreeing or drowning. On Saturday, I borrowed a camera from a friend, a decent lens that could read a book across the courtyard. I felt like a spy and a child, ashamed and electric. At 9, I set it up behind our curtain. At 10, I had pictures of two silhouettes that any jury would call circumstantial and any husband would call a confession. At 11, I was considering what it means to be dignified. I put the camera away. I folded laundry. I waited for her to come home. When she did, she had the soft tiredness of someone who believes they are noble. "We needed to talk," she said when I asked. "About what?" she shrugged. "Life." I made tea and watched the steam write short stories above the cup. "With a man who knows how I smell from across a courtyard," I said, and she set the mug down too carefully. "You're inventing." "I'm observing." Monday evening, our daughter played with her toy kitchen by the balcony door. She made plastic soup and declared it perfect. The balcony across the courtyard was empty. Clouds, fat with the kind of rain that has already decided, gathered over the roofs. My wife touched my arm. "We've been distant," she said, as if nomming a country could grant you a passport. I looked at our feet. The tile was cracked where we had once dropped a pan in a hurry to catch something burning. "Who is he?" I asked. She said, "A friend." I asked what kind. She said, "The kind who listens." The kettle clicked off like an old argument. The next afternoon, before I could plan anything clever, my cousin texted me a link, a wedding photographer's page. In it was a photo of my wife on our balcony, taken from across the courtyard, light catching her hair as if it had something to do with sunrise. The caption read, "Some faces hold storms beautifully." There were no tags. There didn't have to be. The city is a small town when the map is just your own building. I knocked on the door in the twin building. The man who opened had the hoodie and the cigarette and a voice like an apology he'd practiced. "You're Nikita," I said, leaving out all the other names. He looked embarrassed in a way that felt expensive. "She said you were separated," he muttered. I didn't bother to tell him that separation is a word you have to agree on in the same room. "Stop," I said. He nodded quickly the way a photographer nods when someone finally holds still. When I got home, my wife was on our balcony. elbows on the railing as if you could hold up an evening just by leaning against it. I told her I'd spoken to him. She said I had no right. I agreed. I also had no right to every Sunday I had worked overtime so we could have this apartment with this balcony where she now curated her sadness with great taste. Rights are tricky in love. They often look like obligations wearing better shoes. We tried briefly to have one of those civilized conversations that appear in magazines next to coffee cups. She said she was lonely, that I was always in my head. I said I had been building something for us while she was building something for her on the balcony. She cried beautifully and told me she hadn't slept with him. I asked if the things that happen when people almost touch require a bed to count. I moved to the couch that night. The couch is the embassy where failed countries apply for new stamps. At 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of rain and went to the window. The opposite balcony was slick and empty. The building across looked like a theater after the audience has left, only a mop and a ghost to applaud. I held the curtain and felt nothing conquer me, neither fury nor relief, just a blank page that didn't know which story wanted it. Weeks passed in small negotiations. Whose turn to get groceries? Whether the plants on the balcony could be trusted to know the difference between drought and silence. I kept working. She kept going to the balcony after dinner, as if the air itself were a confidant. Nikita stopped posting for a while. Maybe he had found a kinder view. Maybe the weather changed the kind of living he was selling. One evening, our daughter asked if the balcony could be our picnic place again. We had once eaten strawberries there and laughed about the way the juice stained our fingers. We went out with a blanket and sat in the space where shadows had learned my name. Across the courtyard, someone was playing a piano with two hands that belonged together. My wife looked at me and I saw a woman who might have been my wife in another story. "I made a mistake," she said. I nodded. "We made many." She shook her head. "This one was mine." I slept in our bed that night, not because we fixed anything, but because being broken isn't always a reason to sleep on a different mattress. In the morning, I called a lawyer. I asked about separation that isn't a word but a map with a new route to work and a new way to put your keys down. He told me what people like me always think is new is actually very old. Start with what matters, end with what doesn't. We sold the apartment in autumn when the leaves across the courtyard turned to coins and fell like generous old men. We split the books and the bowls and the art we had bought at a fair because a woman told us it would age well. On the last day, I stood on the balcony and waved to the window opposite. Nikita came out and lifted a hand like a flag he didn't want to carry. I nodded. He nodded. Two men who had both misunderstood the same person, saying thank you to an empty stage. Now I live in a smaller place with no balcony. The windows look at trees instead of other windows, which is easier on the heart. On weekends, Mia and I have picnics on the floor and pretend the carpet is the sky. Sometimes, late, I go out and listen to other people's music bleeding from cars at lights and think how every love song I hear is announcing the weather somewhere I don't live anymore. Tell me where you're watching from and how old you are. And if you have a balcony, I hope it faces a view you can trust.